Hi, my name is Randy Adams. I came to California in 1985 where I sold a company doing desktop publishing products, and it did quite well. And some of my friends who worked with me there went to work at Next, and they told Steve Jobs that he should hire me. So I went in for an interview, and I spent some time talking to Steve and the other engineers there. And I went back to my apartment in San Francisco, and I was getting pretty big royalty checks, and I really didn't want to work, so I turned down the job offer. And about 2 days later, my phone rang, and I didn't answer it, but on my message machine was a message from Steve, and he said, "Randy, you're blowing it. This is an opportunity of a lifetime, and you have an opportunity to work at Next, and you're blowing it." And I thought, okay, Steve Jobs called me up and told me I'm blowing it. I better take a job at Next. So I went to work at Next. I was fortunate enough to have a little extra cash, and I bought a 911 Porsche, and at the same time Steve bought one. As a matter of fact, we had the same sound system installed. And we'd park together next to each other in 3 parking spaces at Next because we didn't want to get door dings. So we'd park quite far apart. And one day I was working at my desk, and Steve Jobs came to me and he said, "Randy, we have to move the Porsches." And I'm like, "Why, Steve?" And he said, "Well, Ross Perot is coming, and he's going to invest, and I don't want him to think we have a lot of money." So we hid the Porsches in the back of the building, and Ross Perot invested, so I guess it worked. It was the fall of 1986, and Bill Gates came to visit Steve Jobs. I think Steve wanted to give him a demo of the Next machine. And he came, there was a 2-story building. Steve's office was in the upstairs, and he was in a cube. And I saw him sitting there doing nothing, and Bill arrived and sat downstairs, and Steve made him sit there for an hour before he'd take the meeting, and Steve wasn't busy at all. And he would do that a lot. And we thought as engineers, what better opportunity to sit down and talk to Bill Gates for an hour? So we all went down and sat on the couch with him and talked to him. It was amazing. I left Next because I sort of, I didn't believe after a while. And you kind of have to believe when you work with Steve, or it's not, you just can't do what he asks you to do. And the optical drive in the Next box was the only storage that was, the non-memory storage that was available on the machine. And we were running a Unix operating system, a Mach, which is a derivative of Unix, which swapped out a lot of stuff out of memory. And it needed a fast hard disk, and the hard disk wasn't fast. And I said at an engineering meeting, "Steve, this is just going to thrash itself to death and be incredibly slow." And the machine wasn't built yet, but just looking at the specs, it looked like that was going to happen. And Steve looked at all the other engineers and said, "Does anybody agree with Randy?" And nobody raised their hand, so I thought, okay, I better go do something else for a while. I was running engineering at Adobe, and Steve called me up one day and said, "Randy, you were right about that hard disk thing. The optical disk didn't do really well, but we have a new Next machine. We call it the Pizza Box. It has a hard disk in it. It's fast. You need to leave your job and start a software company for Next, and I'll give you the word processor as a first starting product for you." So again, Steve called and asked, and I did. About a year into this company, and after we'd gone through most of the $2 million that Sequoia had invested and had 8 working software products, Steve called me up one night and said, "Randy, I just wanted to let you know we're not going to do hardware anymore. We think it's a commodity item, and we're just going to sell the software." And I looked at a market that I thought was going to be quite big, and all of a sudden, instantly, it became quite small, and I knew the company was done. And I said to Steve, "Steve, why don't you just sell PCs?" And he said, "Randy, I'd rather sell dog shit than PCs." I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I guess it's over." I didn't want to be holding the bag for this with Sequoia necessarily without at least letting people know that Steve had made this decision. So I wrote an email basically paraphrasing what Steve had told me the night before, and I sent it to Steve confirming it, and also to Mike Moritz, and also to Steve's president of Next at the time, Peter Van Kuylenburg. And I guess Steve hadn't told him of this change of things because Peter quit the next day, and Steve was furious at me. He called me at home for like 3 days in a row. I wouldn't take his call because I knew he was going to just bite my head off. And after the 3rd day, I took his call. I thought he might be calmed down. And he said, "Randy, you effed me." And I'm like, "Oh, no, you effed yourself, Steve." He said, "No, you effed me." And he screamed and he screamed and he screamed at me. We made up later, and it was okay. But you don't want to be on the bad side of Steve, for sure. One thing Steve had a passion for was perfection, and he wouldn't let a product go out the door unless it was perfect. And I know he's up there looking down, just wanting to fire somebody because of this Maps thing. It wouldn't be Tim Cook, but some engineer would have been laid off, I can guarantee you, as a result of that Maps fiasco if Steve is still working there. I know a lot of celebrities. I've met a lot of very powerful people in my life, and I have to say, of all the people I've met, there was nobody, clearly nobody like Steve. When you were next to him and he was talking to you, you could feel the electricity in your body. You could feel his charisma. And it wasn't just because he was a cult leader or anything. You just actually could feel it, because I'm not necessarily a cult follower. And he made you feel, he could inspire you. He made you feel like you could do anything. And as long as you believed that, you really could do anything, as long as you're willing to sacrifice everything else. And I took my time with him, and I learned this from him. And I became a follower of Steve, and I felt like I could do anything. And I've started 6 or 7 companies after that, and been very successful. But you know, last year when Steve died, it's sort of like a Shakespearean play. A little bit of that feeling that you could do anything and you could change the world, it kind of went away. Because I don't know that there's anybody else alive in the world that could make me feel that way. So it's a little sad.